I would like to take this opportunity now to introduce Britta Baron, who serves as the moderator for this panel on addressing global challenges. Britta has a very long history with the German House. She has served as the director of DAAD North America, and it was during her tenure that the German University's Liaison Officer Initiative was developed. I'm especially glad that we can welcome her back home. Thank you, Britta, for being here. Britta herself is at the intersection of research and innovation, and I'm grateful that she will be sharing the background and context of this panel before the statement from our three presidents. Britta Baron.
Well, thank you very much, Priya. It's obviously a great delight, and personally, a very, very happy moment for me to come back. A long time ago, I have a long history, full stop, and but this has been a very meaningful and very pleasant part too of my life. The 6 years I spent here in New York. There were some very dramatic moments there, like the September 11th events, and we were actually guests in the IIE building with the delegation of German university presidents and vice presidents, as it happened. So it was a memorable and dramatic day, but it was also a day and a week of great friendship and solidarity and civic sense of togetherness that was super impressive and great. It was so meaningful for all of us who was there, and how we lived through those few days as a member of the New York community, and enjoying and feeling the uplifting effect of the solidarity of people of New York. At the time. So, as an introduction, I wanted to go back a little bit into various phases of my professional life, very, very briefly, because I think they show also various dimensions of what we're talking about. Intersections of science, science diplomacy, and academia, and government. In fact, how do they come together? What opportunities do they bring, and what risks may they also bring to us? So I started off in Germany. I'm a dual citizen and Canadian and German, but I was born and raised in Germany, started off with DAD. And at that time, in the early 1980s, the leading paradigm for anybody operating in this space was really peace building, bringing tolerance, inspiring international friendship. And in the case of Germany, it was very much also establishing Germany again as a member of the global knowledge community after 2 world wars that were caused by Germany, and after the Holocaust. That was the overriding paradigm, actually, was regaining friends across the world and respectability. I have to say, in that context, that is still, for me, a very inspiring and very important dimension of what we're doing. I was in another historic moment, October 3rd, 1990, when the unification agreement was signed. I happened to be in London, UK, and the embassy had done a lovely, really, really meaningful event. And they asked me pretty much at short notice to invite Jewish citizens of German Jewish background in the academia. So I was able, we had the relationships, and I was able to invite a good number of them, and they all came, and they sang the Deutschlandlied. So that was probably one of the most touching moments in my entire professional life. So the inspiration of that notion that the international education and universities more generally can play a role in this process of creating understanding, tolerance, peace, nation building, did come from the United States. I think the German DAD, established in 1925, was very much inspired by IIE, established in 1919, and followed those ideas and that value system very much. it was later that, and I was already with the DAD in Germany, that I saw a new paradigm evolving. That was pretty much in the 1970s, when universities and organizations in that area were more dedicated to more openly political goals. And in this case, it started off with capacity building and nation building, and capacity building for nation building in third world countries. I personally was super excited with those developments, and again, it was a very meaningful part of my own career. Then in the 1980s, again, I was lucky enough to witness in person another more political dimension introduced into the world of international education through the Erasmus program. I was a member of the staff of the small unit in Brussels and developed that program. And whereas the idea for IIE, international mobility, was very much individual mobility, it was all of a sudden more structured, more politically mandated idea, where the benefits for the students' careers was important, and where the integration into curricula and degree programs was the vehicle, the strategy to make it accessible and meaningful to much larger numbers of students than had been the case in the past. It's evidently been a phenomenal success story. I think by now, by way more than 2 million students have benefited from Erasmus support personally, but also the notion that that kind of experience would contribute to building a European mindset, I think worked out very, very well. So a unique success story, and great credits to some of the people, the very smart people. This was just a handful, frankly, of people who initially made that happen and developed those ideas. Later on and now, and frankly, we're seeing yet another new paradigm come up. And this is more, in my personal case, also a bit happen to be involved with that. But I think it's also coming more broadly to universities. The notion that research collaboration is not only something, as we have been saying in hundreds and thousands of speeches, that is genuine to research, and international is a mandatory and a completely indispensable part of research. Well, I'm now looking at Horizon Europe and the huge programs that the EU Commission is launching. That is the attempt of actually, again, structuring these processes, giving them a push, giving them direction, giving them focus, rather than just waiting for them to organically happen. And I think, again, it's a very bold idea. It's one that so far has also generated lots of success, and it's probably an inspiration for all of us to think about the limitations, the benefits and the limitations of these more politically inspired, if not pushed, and structured approaches, both to internationalization in education and in research. Well, this is going through my own life, my own career story, some of the possible dimensions and some of the ideas that maybe could inspire also all of us here for thinking ahead into where are we going from here. We are very fortunate to have 3 university presidents give their own perspectives and give their own view of what they think can and needs to be done. I don't know, so Franco, you want to start? Okay, sorry.
That's fine. Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone. It's really a great pleasure to be here today, among esteemed colleagues and partners, to celebrate these 20 years of University Alliance Ruhr. In fact, I found out that this office is 3 years older than the University Alliance. So University Alliance was installed in 2007, and the office apparently opened in 2004, and we should find out during our stay there whether this was probably the first act or action where we demonstrated that collaboration brings a huge benefit, and as a result of this office, probably University Alliance was initiated discussions. I first of all want to thank our Executive Director, Priya Nayar, for the excellent organization of all activities related to our anniversary. Thank you very much, Priya, and of course you will also get a scarf. But later. I still have some left. So if anybody else is interested in a scarf, send me a mail. I cannot promise that I have enough scarves with me, but you can send me a mail, and if you combine it with your address, I will send it over to you. So
I asked you at customs what you were selling?
Fortunately, I could pass without any control. But I think I had 10 or so. It's like a business. Yeah, definitely, yeah. So I think the topic which we are supposed to talk about is universities as drivers of positive change amidst complex global challenges. And I thought, I would be happy if we could fulfill this mission only partly, because I think it's very complicated, and it's evident that during the last 2 decades we have undergone profound changes and transformations in universities, and I think during the last couple of years they have been accelerated by complex global challenges, and this is obvious. We have the climate change, we have obviously threats to peace and security, we have growing inequalities within a society and among societies, and all of them pose obviously significant risks to humankind and to the planet. But as president, and I speak here also for my two colleagues, as presidents of universities, we have been confronted with some of these challenges firsthand. This starts from navigating the unprecedented disruptions that the COVID pandemic brought to witnessing the ramifications of geopolitical crisis. You know that Germany has been hit, for example, by waves of refugees, which we need to deal with, and I'm not sure that we do this very well. Even though there are great efforts. So we really have to come to understand what it means to be in a permanent crisis, and in Germany there is now a new word which is called Stapelkrise, stable crisis. So one crisis on top of each other, and it's not continuous. So this is a very, very fashionable word in these days among politicians. I think there are also significant challenges for universities. I think budget cuts are almost unavoidable. They will certainly come because you all know that the economy in Germany is not in extremely good shape. Then there is, of course, a pervasive spread of disinformation going along with this erosion of trust in scientific expertise. And then there is the rising pressure on academic freedom. And we celebrate here 20 years of University Alliance Ruhr, but we also celebrating in this month 75 years of our constitution. And actually it's not called constitutions, but it's called Grundgesetz, which one would translate basic law. Also, it's not a very good translation, but it was considered to be some intermediate solution until German reunification happens, which you just mentioned. Because then the idea was to introduce a real constitution. But I do not know why we never did this, but probably people found our current constitution so good that they saw no reason for a change. But what is remarkable, coming back to academic freedom, this is placed as a very precious value, very highly in the constitution. So already in Article 5, paragraph 3, it's written, Kunst und Wissenschaft, Forschung, Lehre sind frei. I think the best translation is art and science, research and teaching cannot be restricted. And this is really out of our German history, where some years ago science was controlled by politicians with catastrophic consequences. Scientists contributing basically to mass murder by developing corresponding methods and tools. So this is really a value that we respect a lot and should respect a lot. So, but all these challenges that I mentioned, they threaten the integrity of academic research and scientific progress at large. So it is crucial that we maintain our dedication to this academic integrity and to societal progress. And I find it during the last 3.5 years that I'm a rector, I find this a very complex and complicated task, because we are in this crisis mode, that you are tempted to deal all the time with crisis, but do not think ahead and think about solutions, but you are fully problem and crisis driven. And this is certainly a challenge that we have to face. So at our university, and I think at Duisburg in general, we are really committed to catalyzing the progress through, I think, three main avenues. Certainly not all avenues, but three main avenues. The first is interdisciplinary research and teaching. The second is internationalization, and the third is strong alliances, not only among our universities, but also with industry and society. And I want to elaborate a little bit on this and give you a few examples, and I hope that I can restrict myself, so, because I was told to stay below 10 minutes. And I think I used already half of my time. So, interdisciplinary research and teaching, we prioritize such interdisciplinary approaches with the goal to dismantle conventional barriers between disciplines and to gain a comprehensive understanding of complex issues. For example, we offer numerous interdisciplinary degree programs. Examples at our university are data science, business mathematics, and quite exotic economic policy job journalism. We also enable the establishment of central interdisciplinary scientific institutions, and our 5 profile areas, which range basically from innovation for sustainability to societal transformation, they really represent, from our perspective, highly important research fields, and hopefully they underscore our commitment to address pressing global challenges. Second point, internationalization. This is really something that we foster at all levels. Currently we have 30,000 students, more than 5,000 are coming or are students of our universities from 120 countries, and they certainly enrich our university community. In total, they constitute roughly 17% of our student body. When we started our business 3.5 years ago, among 40 master's programs, only 3 of them were taught in English, so we sort of created a lot of pressure on our departments to convert more and more of these courses into English taught courses. At the moment, we have already 15 master's courses which are taught in English, and by the end of this year we will be at 20, so half of the master's courses will be taught in English, obviously with the hope to make our university more attractive for international students. And the first departments actually also are thinking about converting the bachelor courses into English taught courses. Obviously, we heard about this in the morning, so I can be brief here. Our partnership with North American institutions and mostly US institutions so far, but hopefully also an increasing number of Canadian institutions. We have these very intense exchange programs with 40 American students coming to our universities per year and studying there, and an equal number of our students goes out and has the opportunity and the chance to study in the US. I think these numbers can be increased further. And I think this international cooperation increasingly also extends beyond student exchange by integrating international researchers into doctoral training or in other research programs. We are convinced that this will enhance our academic excellence. It's very well known that in many fields, Germany simply does not produce enough young researchers, and hopefully we will get also some inflow from foreign students who are not only talented but motivated. Motivation in these days is sometimes a problem among German students. There is no German students here, so third point, strong alliances with industry and society. We heard already in the previous session that this is something which is very important for us. In 2017, we created our Center for Entrepreneurship and Transfer, which really supports aspiring entrepreneurs in implementing their business ideas and facilitating the transfer from research to business. Going back already more than almost 40 years, the university is co-founder and shareholder of the so-called Technology Center in Dortmund, which is still among the top 5 technology parks in Europe. And actually, to be honest, maybe our university was not founded originally to be so much excellent in science, but rather to transfer knowledge into industry and convert this area from a heavy industry area into a high-tech industry, and this worked pretty well. And we just learned that we have this very good exchange program with Lehigh, where 5 of our students had the privilege to participate in the technical entrepreneurship week at Lehigh. So maybe to summarize this point, we are highly committed to transatlantic cooperation, and we are convinced that this is necessary to solve pressing global problems. But it's also necessary for maintaining our way of life in democratic societies. And therefore I think that it's crucial that we strengthen our ties continuously and work even closer together. We have within University Alliance Ruhr 2 prime programs in order to have collaboration and exchange. One is the School Fellowship Program, and the other one is a Future Fellow Program, which we will learn about more in the evening, I think. What I'm personally missing is a Senior Fellowship Program, so I'm thinking of my time after retirement, so 4.5 years to go. I hope that at that point a Senior Exchange Program will be to conclude, I think universities can play a pivotal role as agents of positive change, but not necessarily. We have to change our attitude, how we approach programs, and of course the 3 contributions that we can provide is cutting-edge research, innovative approaches to education, and collaborative partnerships. And if we develop this continuously, I think we are able to create, or at least to contribute to a more sustainable and equitable future. 3 more points which are essential in that respect. I think ensuring affordability and accessibility are of paramount importance for promoting social mobility and advancing critical thinking skills. And at least in Germany, where we do not have a lot of support from private persons or companies for universities, I think for us it will be essential to sustain public funding at a considerable level to support these objectives. Because I don't have very high hopes that we can convince the owners of our big companies that they will spend a lot of money for universities. They say we pay a lot of taxes, so the state should provide the education system. And we also need to work hard on protecting and actively promoting academic freedom. This is a challenge in these days, and with this I basically want to stop. Let us continue our important projects and strengthen transatlantic partnerships for the benefit of our institutions and our communities. Thank you very much.
Well, I can add that the nice thing is that Manfred has already said almost everything, and that's the nice thing about the University Alliance Ruhr, because in this process, starting as 3 different, even competing universities, we really have grown together, and a lot of our strategies are quite comparable. The rector is not only dressed in the same color outfit without being asked to do this by Ria, and we also meet very regularly. So I will deviate a bit from my script, and I think that the topic of this session is global challenges and this interface, this interesting intersection between science, diplomacy, and academia. And I would like to make 3 points. One is the inside look and the reflection on if there's something wrong with academia these days in our universities. And I see what's happening at the moment at many campuses in the United States and increasingly so in Europe, this kind of confrontation, polarization, speechlessness, and inability to have a dialogue is something that made me reflect whether we have all our missions still right. Of course we do research and education and transfer and the so-called third mission transfer also to society. I think that for me a very essential part of university is what I would call academic citizenship. because we also educate and provide the citizens of the future for our societies, both region. And sometimes when I read the New York Times or other papers, I'm asking myself whether we have done enough to do this, because the principles of debate, not only academic freedom, but also freedom of speech, is something that comes increasingly under pressure. It comes to a pressure on our campuses, it also puts pressure on us as university leadership and academic communities. And I've asked myself, why is this the case? Because there's the statistics. If you look at organizations 500 years and older, many of them are universities. They're very resilient. We have overcome many things. But what is happening now? And I think that's also then my second point. You have to look what's happening around us. I believe we are all, of course, living in a period, or have experienced a period after the Second World War, of incredible peace, wealth, democracy, and I think this was, and that brings me also to the question of the role of transatlantic partnerships, that it's the principle of a liberal democracy that has been the guarantee to all these factors, and has also provided an ecosystem for us to grow and proliferate and do our work in a good way. And this system is increasingly under pressure. It is under pressure because there are what I would call neo-imperialistic systems in Russia, in China, and maybe also in other places that put us under pressure. So I think we need to address this when we think about how we organize our campuses, our universities. And I believe strongly that we need to build on relationships which have been the guarantee of this liberal democratic system, and I think the transatlantic relationship is one of the backbones that we need to strengthen. I wouldn't say to reinvent, but we need to build upon to really provide something to counter these effects. And that's my second point, and I think the efforts by this office and others that are here in the German House are a good basis. So we should not give up on our traditional partnerships, which have been the result of this liberal democracy that we have really cherished, and that we need to put really this against it. And it means for us again that we need to foster dialogue, that we need to foster also to understand different opinions and to address them with respect. And it also means that we have to really be at the forefront. I always say university campuses should be a microcosm of a world where we really understand each other, and I'm really afraid at the moment that comes under pressure. So we need to think together how we can address this, how we can really make sure that these values that we really have based our organizations on over the last decades are really maintained. And I'm saying this because the Ruhr University was the first university after the Second World War built in Germany, and of course this is really our tradition. And how are we doing this? Number one, I believe that we really should have also value-based systems, value-based educations. Number two, and I think we have a strong tradition in this, that we also should be a champion of those who are threatened by the current, I would say, geopolitical challenges. It could be, of course, we have a lot of refugees. The University of Bochum was the first German university who joined the Scholars at Risk. Tomorrow, together with our colleagues, we'll join the Academia in Exile program because of this new school. I think this is very important, that become a champion of those who are underprivileged, whether they're first generation students, whether they're refugees, whether they are under threat from different areas, whether they have problems accessing higher education. Number two, and that's also where we need to collaborate using our networks transatlantically, and this has been said earlier, the biggest challenges are really what we see in Sustainable Development Goals, and climate change, and the energy crisis, the migration crisis. Education is a sustainable development goal. We really need to address this together, and these are global issues. But we always have this discussion here at the University Alliance Ruhr. Ruhr is a region in Germany. We have always the issue, you want to be a regional university or a global or international university. I don't think that's it's not two sides of a coin, it's a continuum. Because a lot of the issues we see on the global level, we see in our region, and also a lot of challenges with our region. You know, we are this universities in this region of post-industrial transition. That's also something we can, in the sense of reciprocity, exchange our ideas with partners all over the world. So I think I had this morning a discussion on whether we should be worried if there's a second presidency of President Trump, and I this morning was a bit negative about it, but after rethinking all these things, if we can make sure that we as a group of organizations on both sides of the Atlantic maintain the values on which we have been built, on which we have been functioning, we can have really strong players in an area and also can contribute to stabilization of these many effects that we see. So that's all really I have to say. I think it's very fascinating to have these exchanges and partnerships, and I think that 20 years of University Alliance Ruhr is something to celebrate, but I think the next 20 years, they will be really the ones to look forward to. Thank you.
So it's my turn, I believe. Before addressing global challenges, I would like to start locally. Every year, the University of Duisburg-Essen honors leading intellectual personality with the so-called Mercator Professorship. And the namesake of this award, the Flemish geographer and cartographer, Gerhard Mercator, he was disrupted in his scientific advancements by political and religious persecution, which he fled in 1552. And he fled to the more tolerant and peaceful city of Duisburg, politically and religiously tolerant and peaceful city. At that time, a university was promised and not realized in his lifetime. But in Duisburg, Mercator went on to publish maps that enabled the age of exploration. He did not only publish maps, but he was an innovator. He invented the Mercator projection. It was a new type, at that time, a new type of navigation or course finding, and this opens a long history of globalization in a certain way. So, exile, tolerance, international scientific cooperation, and the transfer of scientific innovations across national borders is engraved in the history of science, also in the history of Duisburg, and in the history of the University of Duisburg-Essen, a university that was founded, then abandoned, then founded twice again, once alone, then fused with the University of Essen just 20 years ago. So we are kind of young university now. Addressing global challenges today is far more complex, but like in the 16th century, it demands a tolerant and peaceful environment. And the active provision of protection for scientists throughout the world, whose creation of knowledge is disrupted by political persecution. And from its beginnings, science transcends borders, and in the contemporary era of globalization, scientific and higher education institutions around the world benefit from close ties and active cooperation. It has been said here today many times. Keeping channels of communication open is especially important where scientific freedoms are under threat from autocratic governments and military conquests. And university degrees and scientific titles are recognized internationally, and scientific progress is driven by international collaboration and competition. Yet, of course, science is also dependent on resources and scientific freedom, and meaning that universities in rich and democratic countries have a responsibility for not only providing protection, but for building capacities for peacemaking and creating knowledge to support the forms of diplomacy required to ensure that economic growth and global competition does not come at the cost of environmental destruction and the loss of universal values and human rights. And the advancement of science and academia is not only an end in itself. International scientific collaboration has a strong impact on many non-scientific spheres, including the global economy and the foreign relations in governments. And during the last decades, we have experienced many positive developments based on the internationalization of science and higher education. But during recent years, the global security as well as the economic situation has changed, meaning that we must vigilantly protect these positive developments. We must recognize that science and higher education have become assets in a new geopolitical competition for innovation as well as power. Authoritarian states attempt to gain access to dual-use technologies, both through legal and illegal means. In many countries, academic freedom is under threat. The Academic Freedom Index update 2024 states that 45.5% of the world's population live in 27 countries where academic freedom is completely restricted, and that academic freedom currently is declining around the world due to increasing political and societal polarization. We have learned that scientific exchange is not always and per se progressive in the sense of strengthening academic freedom and democratic values, as the current problems faced in cooperation with, for example, China underline. In its Brussels Declaration, adopted on February 1624, the EU Ministerial Conference underlines the, I'm quoting, importance of shared principles and values, as well as of understanding the diversity of principles and the values for strengthening diverse international research and innovation cooperation in a trusted, open, accessible, inclusive, participatory, non-discriminatory and safe manner. And scientific collaboration, science diplomacy, still, or maybe even more today than ever, are important drivers towards a more sustainable and peaceful future. Scientists build bridges between societies, between governments, and help to develop common strategies to address global challenges. Global challenges like the climate change, the loss of biodiversity, and much more, the necessary transformation of the economic world caused by all these changes. Science diplomacy is defined by the British Academy of Science Royal Society. It's not only the contribution of science to political diplomacy and governmental goals, but also the presence of a political context enabling scientific cooperation. For this, universities need political support oriented towards elevating science diplomacy as a prominent part of foreign policy, but also economic and development policies. The responsibility for building global scientific capacities lies especially with the more democratic nations of the world, where science systems have strong and established commitments to academic freedom. Nations like Germany and the US and Canada, and I'm glad that we are here to discuss these things today. Thank you.
Well, thank you to our three speakers. I have prepared a number of questions, but frankly, based on your contributions, there's a frankly provocative question that comes to mind. There's a lot of unanimous support for the notions of tolerance and peace building and respect of the rule of law as the guiding principles for universities and how we want to build their futures. If we look at international rankings, and I know this is not always a very popular reference point, but sometimes it is unavoidable as reality check. I recently saw a ranking of the 50 universities in the world with the most growth in their academic output and academic achievements. Not, absolutely where they are, but in terms of how they had moved forward. 47 of them were located in China. So how do we view these two dimensions of our conversation? The commitment to liberalism, to peace building, tolerance, and the rule of law, and then a country that clearly has not a lot of respect for those dimensions but is performing extremely productively and successfully. What kind of reactions does that juxtaposition produce here in all of us in the room? Yes.
Who measures this growth, and how do we measure growth? I mean, this makes all the difference, and I really think that responsibility, and all three rectors have just made a point about that we have a big responsibility with regard to the citizens of our country, the citizens of the world, and the way in which some rankings measure need to be taken into consideration. And we also know that growth and the focus on growth only has driven the world to a certain point where we need to reconsider.
Okay, so growth is not really what we necessarily need to achieve, and growth is also a dimension that is you can quantify that in various ways.
Oh, you can, but you have to see what you figure in.
Right.
And responsibility is one thing that very often in these rankings is not considered. If I hear that it's China who basically makes the cut best, one wonders. Which doesn't mean that we don't have to also grow, but in a more broader way.
I do a lot of research on internationalization of higher education, particularly medical education, and there are three models of motivation for internationalization. And I think the reason why China is pushing so much forward is what we call the market model. The market model is a competitive model to bring your country forward in the sciences, to have the world lead. This model is not sustainable because after a certain time you've reached your goal, and then the interest in internationalization will drop. What I think what Germany and hopefully the US does is more what we call the liberal model, which is the model for international understanding and peace building, and that has a very high chance of sustainability because we all want to maintain the peace. So I think it's worthwhile looking at the motivation why certain countries move forward and not compare us with those countries because their motivation is different and the end result might be a lot will be short-lived than our motivation or the motivation of the Western and democratic countries.
So can I ask you, what makes you think that it's going to be short-lived? So you said it's going to run itself out.
Those competitive models are typically from the top down. So a lot of institutions just do the check mark. How many publications do I have? How many students have I graduated? Where do we stand in terms of scientific innovations? After a certain time, those benchmarks have been reached, and you cannot do more because you're already at the top of the crowd. So then internationalization will lose interest, lose funding. And what is really dangerous for this model is that inward thinking will start. There's no interest in sending students out, no interest in global collaboration and partnership because you have a very national point of view, a very self-centered around your own country. So in the future, you will not have any more input from outside. You only look at yourself.
Sorry.
Thank you, Ms. Barrett. First of all, thank you for contextualizing your own career in, I think, some of the touch points of what we're finding ourselves today in the era of science diplomacy. I was really impressed by your notion, Professor Alberts, by science as an asset in geopolitics. When we talk about science diplomacy, we've long talked about the collaborative side of science diplomacy as a driving knowledge for the greater good. The DLD has 2 years ago come out with a piece, the new science diplomacy in a multipolar world, in which it describes the other coin, the other side of the coin of science diplomacy, which is the real political realities that we're facing. China comes to mind. I think you're very passionately, I think we made a great case for why we should be wary of what we're observing. And so, to I think answer your question, I think when we think of a new science diplomacy, we need to balance, on the one hand, a value-based approach with one that is risk-reflexive and has a view on real political tensions that exist and that need to be measured. Sometimes that's done in a very creative way when I look at Germany's national strategy, describing China as partner, rival, and competitor at the same time. But I think that goes to the heart of the new science diplomacy, that we need to look at case-by-case basis. Universities need to help researchers continue driving open science, but also thinking of processes of de-risking. I think questions of securitization in the research and academia become more and more pressing. And that really means that a rebalancing of a new science diplomacy is at play. And so I'm really pleased to hear that all of you are thinking about this, because I'm thinking about this. And look at Annette, we're working on a book on science diplomacy in the medical field. We're working on another research outputs that looks at strengthening the science-society policy interface. And all of those require for us to think about new ways of defining what science diplomacy means in this changing multipolar world. Very cool.
Oh, that's fine. Well, thank you all so much, and thanks to the three presidents for articulating the global challenges and all that universities are struggling with. I would like to add two more. I think I'm the only representative from a public university in a red state, and sorry I bring this up, but it has its own peculiar challenges of politics, especially with politicians trying to influence how academia acts in those states. So I would like to add that as an additional challenge to global challenges, because they clearly view the world very differently than many other universities do. And the other thing which I think you kind of mentioned, but was not explicitly stated, was the whole notion of artificial intelligence, call this in the science field if you may, and how that would influence academia in the next few years, and the global challenges it presents. The example I can give is I was talking to several of our faculty members, and pretty much all of them said that every single paper that the students submitted had huge AI influence in what the students submitted. Our university has moved to a non-standardized testing to admit students. Every single essay that the students write has influence from, let's just say, external sources like ChatGPT and so on. So I think it's going to change higher ed in the future, and it's certainly going to provide huge global challenges to higher education, and we just need to figure out how to address that as well. So those would be two things I would add to all the elements that the presidents mentioned earlier. Thank you.
I guess just to add one more, I think the challenge of representation of the Global South thinking in how we're thinking about the internationalization of policies. Like I see this, for example, in New York City government. You will think that a government in which 40% of the people are foreign will have more diversity and representation at the highest levels of power, but both in the corporate world and in the government and different entities in New York City, you see that it becomes more male and more white, traditionally Anglo-Saxon, the higher you go, right? And so it does make a huge deal of a difference how we're imagining these power dynamics when we imagine them from a place of power and benefits, such as New York City, right? Versus when you can bring those perspectives. And sometimes it's you start by in the hierarchies, right? So how as we think about this internationalization strategies, we're hiring people that are capable of carrying out policies that include those dynamics, I think is important.
So Raj, you mentioned ChatGPT and essay and the way people are writing their essays, and I think that's, as educators, one of the things we have to think about is how do we evaluate our students, and how can we find more creative ways to do that and still assess learning.
I'm not going to ask a question about AI or Trump. So they're really important, one more important than the other, so I hope we come back to that. I've learned more in the past hour about 3 great universities in a country that I thought I knew. I don't think I've ever been to your cities or your universities. It doesn't matter about me, but are you thinking about how to market the Ruhr Valley, like Lehigh is thinking about, so that students from abroad, and particularly from America, as we rediscover Europe in study abroad programs, you already have a lot of international students, but do you need a marketing strategy so that more Americans discover your cities as opposed to just Berlin?
Yes. You know, one striking argument for US students and their parents actually is that there's no tuition fees in Germany. So you can easily spend, let's say, $20,000 on learning German if you don't want to follow an English program, and that's a great deal. And you know, the values that we have, we've stressed them all 3 independently, is something that could be also something very beneficial. You know, we have really in some areas world-class research. We are not that high in the rankings because we have also our societal role of teachers' education and things like that. So yes, if somebody helps us to market us, we will be all there.
Marketing is not our strong point.
But maybe the alliance is the thing, like what Cheryl has built at Lehigh Valley, that can help put the universities on our map.
But actually, we do not only need a marketing strategy for American students, but even for German students. Yeah? Because I come from the southern part of Germany, and I never went to a Ruhr area before I was appointed there as professor there, because from southern Germany you do not consider this as a part where it's worth living. So I think we need a global marketing strategy, including the southern part of Germany. Maybe this is similar to Texas and whatever.
I believe the scarves are a good start.
Yeah. Could be also disputed.
Wait till next week.
I'd like to go back to Jan Lüder's consideration about what is science diplomacy, and maybe want to ask the broader audience here that very question, including that question that you also addressed, Jan, as to, well, how do we deal with the risks? So there's definitely more awareness about risks here in the United States, to a lesser extent Canada, than in Germany, but it's of growing concern. Do we overreact, or are we naive, or where are we in that spectrum between naivety and overreaction when it comes to understanding the risks of international collaboration?
Of course, in regard to China, this is something we're all forced to do also because of federal policy. And I think that we've all, well, first of all, the German economy is extremely tied and entangled with the Chinese economy, and our own economic development would be greatly impaired if we stopped cooperation tomorrow. But there is a degree of disengagement that I think we all have to be willing to accept, because there are real risks of espionage, and for that reason, I think all of our universities are developing policies and procedures that start with the faculties asking, is this cooperation necessary? And if it's necessary, is it risky? How risky is it? And there's ways of measuring this, whether it's the 7 suns or whether it's certain technologies. And the way we're developing it in Duisburg is always to make a loop back to the rectorate as well, which we never did before with country cooperations. They usually were decided from the bottom up. But I think the bottom line is that we want to stay open, but we know that opening has risks, and we have to manage those risks rather than closing.
I would also like to add that we have to ask ourselves what's more risky. I mean, closing channels of communication. I can't see that the advantages would be higher than not closing them. If we learn to or continue to interact with countries like China, the minimum is that we know them better than we would know them if we close the channels. We also teach the language, like in our institutes, learn the language. And nowadays in natural sciences, China does not need to steal our ideas. I mean, they are at the same level as we are. So if we stop communicating with them, I think there's also a loss. So of course we don't want to be the ones which are suffer under espionage, but it's never a solution just to close the channels of communication. And this is our main, I mean, we are under some kind of political pressure to do so, but it's my deep conviction that as long as possible we want to interact on a scientific level and use this to stabilize kind of thinking part of the population of the country which lives under non-democratic conditions.
I have one, two. Oh, see.
Yeah, I think that this goes exactly to your last half sentence, namely that whenever we stop communicating with the country, we forget that the government is not the whole country. And so I would strongly vote for keeping some lines of communication open, because otherwise we really deprive them, part of the people, of hope. And
Second question.
Just a short addition. Our two universities are also very, very strong in Chinese studies, and that I think is important to realize that we have an educational and research mission. When countries get particularly difficult to deal with, we need more knowledge, not less, and we need to build that into our curriculums. And I think we've done that in the case of China, which makes it easier for us also to manage the risks because we know the country.
I've been working with China for 40 years. I'm a scientist by training. The past year, many in the room, I guess. The past year, I've worked with Alan and a group of, 10 or so of us from the US and 15 top universities in China, such that we make sure, so again, consortia, which was brought up earlier, that the university to the university connections actually keep alive, even if it gets worse between the governments of China and the US. So that is academic diplomacy, scientific diplomacy, I think, in the right level. I mean, there's certainly health, the pandemic-related issues. There's global warming. Even if we don't discuss quantum computing, there's plenty of things for us to be discussing that keep the people interacting. So people to people, scientist to scientist, whatever level you want to call it, I think it's essential, and it is going on, and I think it should go on, and it will go on. I mean, it's not just between the US and China. So I hope that the wins, certainly we have plenty of people in Washington and around the country that want to stop it. It's not just red state, blue state in the US. By the way, there's certainly plenty on both sides that want to cut the relations with China and stop accepting students and stop student mobility. So I'm all for those of you that express the view of keeping these relations going. And again, not with China, many other places, many global problems have to keep going on. On that point, let me stop there.
Thank you. Many important thoughts that I really value so much here. I want to bring in one more aspect, and looking now at our situation with China, and we discussed this with the IAE and partners in Washington DC last week. We of course have to look back at what we did over the course of the last years and decades with challenging partners. And I very much liked how, Britta, you took us on a journey over your experiences of international exchange related to German history, the background and everything. I would like to add here the recent example of Russia, actually as an example where our efforts for mutual understanding, working towards peace, failed. We have to be honest here. It didn't work out. In February 2022, Russia attacked Ukraine, and all our hopes that Russia would cooperate, that it would respect the rule of law, all these hopes came to an end. And I think we should be honest here and reassess our politics of trying to cooperate with Russia and try to get some lessons from that for new challenges. And of course, Jan, we discussed this a lot, you're totally right. Our approaches for international education should be value-based and risk-aware. And the latter, risk awareness, I think, was an aspect of the cooperation with Russia where we didn't see the risk enough, at least in Europe. I have to say that there was risk awareness, but it was not. There was not enough focus on the imperialistic traditions of Russia. And this brings me also to one more point. When we now think about cooperation with other regions and countries, China was mentioned. So one more aspect to, in my mind, it should be we have to define our interest. And this is one more thought I would like to bring in here. So without knowing what we really want and where we want to go, I don't believe we can be successful. Among the things that were mentioned today was also the liberal model or the liberal democracy, and we learned from the post-war era that liberal democracy requires also prosperity, economic strength, because without that, without innovation that brings us economic strength, we will not be able to help countries or people who need our support. So if we want to help refugees, if we want to help countries that are under threat or attack, we need to be prepared, we need to have expertise, but we also need to define our own interests. And our own interest can be prosperity, but can and should be surely also values. And just looking back at our work with Russia and other countries, I think sometimes we neglected that. We didn't really define our own interests and didn't see the risks enough. And I would express the hope that now we're better prepared. Among the things I could mention is that DED, our organization, published a China strategy in January where we exactly point out value-based, risk-aware, and approach, and including also the definition of interest. Thank you.
I think I'm going to move on to another question, and we've talked about, obviously, for obvious reasons, about the Germany, United States I mentioned. China has now come up a lot more, but in reality it is pretty obvious that the world is getting, or the globe is getting flatter, that more and more and more countries are emerging as self-conscious and strategic players in the bigger global knowledge community, if it is a community. So how do we see that the paradigm of the US, Germany, Europe, US the relationships and partnership building in the context of a much more diverse and complicated global network, including South Asia, India in particular, but South Asia more broadly, including Africa, including Southeast Asia, so many more players, many more rational political ambitions. So what is the role of the bilateral German-American relationship in that broader context?
I'd be happy to.
Okay, come on.
Maybe not so
Yes.
When Tom Friedman discovered that the world was flat, if you remember that passage of the book, he also said, honey, I just shrunk the kids. Because going with a flatter world, it actually contracted. I don't think he realized that when he said it was going to result in a contraction. But I think we're living through a period of contraction which makes the bilateral relationships even more important. And I think our world is shrinking. The world of international educational exchange and international education generally is actually shrinking. It's not growing. If you look at the top 10 destination countries for international students in the whole world, you and we may be the only ones left. Other countries are out of room. God bless Canada, but it's now capping. The UK, which was the big competitor, is for number 2, is on the road to capping and treating students as immigrants. Russia was a big player in being a destination country. That's left Bologna 2 years ago, and it's saying we only want students from Belarus. China has, we don't know yet, but a lot of people don't want to go there because of what happened during COVID. And they're running out of spaces for their own students. So it's not like they have unlimited capacity. So I think for the rest of this decade, we will be living, yes, in a flat world, but much smaller, which makes what we can do bilaterally more important than it's been in 40 years. A lot of people talk about competition with other countries because they're moving up in the rankings. That's right, they are. But at the end of the day, the international local student wants to come here, wants to come to Germany. It would have come to the UK, would have wanted to come to the UK if the UK had not done Brexit. And we've never thought about the world, us international educators, like that. We just thought of infinite expansion. And I do not think we're going to live through a period of infinite expansion. And there will be more pressure on your universities and ours to take more and more students because there are more Nigerians, Brazilians, and students from the global south that are coming our way than we've ever had reason to think. So we're in really new territory.
think also the value of education in some societies have not been so attractive anymore. I mean, in the US, hearing how much debt students have after they graduate is just not very attractive. And with the advent of technology, people can basically learn from anywhere, on any resource, and some people just decide not to use universities as a tool for education. I think that's something that in some societies education still has a high value and is still respected. Those still probably will value universities, but there are societies that are on the decline. And certainly that will then mirror in how international mobility and student mobility will eventually pan out. But there is room for innovation, right? Maybe university as a local institution might not sustain the waves, even older institutions, but we might have to think about novel methods of teaching larger groups of students, and COIL is a method to do that, right? Collaborative online and international learning tools, where we can collaborate and build partnerships on a different level. And that also goes back to the notion of accessibility and social justice and social equity, to have everyone having the same amount of knowledge and education.
Yeah, so I'm not an expert in any of these topics that we're talking here, just a Spanish guy, so international in that sense, but living in Germany, but that's about it. But it seems to me that people are afraid. So it's like, we've lived like different
pandemics and quite a few things that have been putting people in this reptilian mode. It's like it's risk, it's fear. We don't know if it's okay to go to China. We don't know if it's a way to talk to Chinese people. We shouldn't go to the UK because they're not Europe anymore, or maybe they are. But so the whole world is completely messed up right now if you think about it, right? So I have a feeling that most of the, especially the new students and the young people, including my kids, they don't know where to start, and they don't know what to do, and it's really difficult to give them a sense of direction. And I think these kind of collaborations, that bilateral or maybe even trilateral, they could definitely help in building up this trust that has been lost as far as I'm concerned. When I came to the US to study, it was great. Everybody wanted to go everywhere, and it was great to go to the US, go to Canada, everything's fine. And now people are, no, we don't need to go. it's fine. Zoom, it's okay. And why do we need to go to university? And we have problems just bringing people to our lectures in classes. So I think it's a combination of fear. It's a combination of we're going to be a little bit cautious about what happens next, and a certain commodity that has been a problem in the past years. So maybe these kind of collaborations could help in advancing and putting us in back in this more trustworthy mode that I think we lost.
I'm gonna end up with one last question, and to whoever is a president in this room or feels like she or he would be a president. And that question is, as a president, if you had unlimited resources, what would be the one thing you would do in your environment to advance the credibility, the effectiveness, the success of international collaboration and international education and or research collaboration, whatever dimension you would like to improve?
Well, next to gigantic marketing endeavor, it's unlimited, right? Unlimited. I think I think we need to foster really international exchange of students, of researchers, and also those who are not privileged enough all over the world. So I would increase a lot of scholarships for people from the global south, for refugees and so on, because I strongly believe as somebody who has had the privilege as a student and later as a researcher to see the world from another side than my own country. That has really been essential of creating a sort of feeling for this academic sphere, which is gone far beyond borders of countries. So give me the billions and I will increase the WEOR even more, and with a great marketing concept.
I don't have any aspirations to become a university president, but I do want to say something about that we've even seen in the US, is when we're sending students that haven't come from families with college educations, we also need to prepare the universities where they're going to support them, because if we don't have those support mechanisms, they're not going to succeed. So I just wanted to add that.
Maybe I can add something. If I had unlimited resources, I don't know who has read the book of the Ministry for the Future, I would found the University for the Future and try to attract the most intelligent people from all over the world to combine forces to tackle the challenges of climate change and similar things.
You would fund your own football team, or?
I see that I have spoiled my reputation here.
Yeah, just one last thing. I think we're very concerned with students and with attracting students, but I think what we need is really motivating teachers and professors that bring all this this knowledge to a level where everybody wants to have more of that, right? So there was a study about the educational systems in Europe and in other places, and they found out that teachers, high school teachers from Finland, were really, really proud of being teachers. And it was a profession that had a great amount of recognition in society. That's not the case in Germany, it's not the case in Spain, it's not the case anywhere else. I mean, you become a teacher, a high school teacher, because sometimes you don't know what else to do, right? I mean, and my sister-in-law is a teacher, and she didn't know what to do. She ended up being a high school teacher, right? Nothing wrong about that, but it's this recognition, I think, is actually missing in many places. And if you start, increasing the level of recognition, not only for the professors and teachers and so on, but for being intelligent, for being well educated, I think that could actually happen, and that you need money for that.
So I also want to say that, Joanna, I'm speaking with no aspirations. But I do want to go back to Alan's marketing idea, but I mean, it's in a slightly different direction with unlimited budget to this. One of the things I'm struck by, again, in listening to this conversation is that this is a conversation that's happening among academics. And that we're also dealing in this period, as we talk about, so the fracturing of a lot of structures, this period of an incredible loss of trust in higher education as the enterprise in this. And so I find myself thinking about how do we then take this as a discussion and find a place to where this has sort of resonance or meaning, or we're talking about it outside of this, but we're this kind of a closed space, but a place to where we're giving sort of the meaning to this to our elected officials, our communities, to others to do that. And and we had that, I think back to some of the things that happened during COVID, and we think about much of the success and say the development of vaccines had to do with the kind of international collaboration. And we know that, but what's the narrative that now exists about a lot of what happened? It's the questions about the science, it's the questions about the guidance that we were getting. There was that missed opportunity there. That's not the narrative of what made things happen isn't in the narrative. And so to Alan's marketing campaign, unlimited dollars, it's the narrative of how this kind of exchange is for the public good. It is essential for the public good on this. It's not just because it's a bunch of academics who have a self-interest in this. It's an essential to that. And I think somewhere that's a great story that needs to be told and is very much part of this kind of restoring the trust in public in the role of higher education as that public good to be part of that narrative of improving the condition.
I certainly don't feel like I'm president of the university. but I just really wanted to echo Pedro's point around this idea of it needing to be relevant to the students. You know, how do we make education relevant to the people that we're talking to, especially if we're talking about low-income communities. There's this program in Mexico that I find fascinating. It's called Pilares, and what they were looking at was like the how many students were behind in the PISA outcomes in math and in Spanish and science, and they were saying it's not because they are bad students, right? It is because the education that we provide in this context is not relevant to the reality and the material needs that they have, right? So I think that is very intertwined. You know, the piece of making the educators be valued, respected, proud of what they're doing, and also making the education itself is something that they see the students actually care about, right? Versus having, I don't know how many people, many of you assume teach, but when I go and teach in Cornell, sometimes my students come with headsets, coming from a whole other universe, and I think about these interactions that we're having on things when I was taking classes, right? And how do we imagine our dynamics? I think it's part of the equation.
Okay, I kind of said to myself before this day that I'm not going to talk about design thinking, but I had to bring it up. Because in design thinking, we, instead of sitting in a room like this, we go out to the people, it's human-centered. We go out to the people that we're designing for, talk to them, understand their needs. And I think that's something we always have to keep in mind whenever we're thinking about new projects.
Because it seems not to be about billions of dollars anymore, but a change of how we teach. What I think is also crucial is to bring in the students and the prospective students to then think about what to do and what to do differently. And I think we're still too much centered on what we think is good for them. And if you include them, I mean, we do have this talent network, which in North Rhine-Westphalia, where we have school students that are scouted and that are made to trust in themselves to then really enroll in university. And now they start to be self-organized and help their peers to get into the university. And I think we need to strengthen them, and we need to help them to become more influential. And on the other hand, I totally agree. I think that unfortunately in the German system, there are a lot of people teaching and meaning well that have not been trained to be university teachers. And so there's a disconnect. And so that, I think, would really help to solve some of the problems we are seeing next to advertising and internationalization. Of course, this is more about the internal organization, but I think about design thinking also goes into this direction. So I felt I could do a follow-up.
I wish we had notes on this conversation because they are wonderful. It could be a very creative thought piece issued by maybe the Alliance.
We do have notes, and we also have recording.
Wonderful. God willing, Joe Biden will be president of the United States when America celebrates or marks the 250th anniversary of our founding. If I have a chance to speak to him in a limited budget, I would want him to give every American in college a passport, because only about 10% do, and only 40% of our citizens even have a passport. And every one of those kids in college has a driving license. And to me, the passport for Americans is the 21st century driving license. And then I would ask them to go to Germany, and I know a terrific set of universities that are very willing to, but it's going to take a mindset change of our young people, their professors, and our governmental authorities and how you issue passports to make sure that at the 250th anniversary of a country that had been founded on having and wanting decent respect for the opinions of all. We got to get our people out into the global community to hear what those opinions of us are.
So I'm supposed to summarize. I will not. And as Alan said, I think this has been a fantastically interesting, creative, fruitful, productive conversation, and it has, I think, ultimately paid so much, it's very much been inspired by the passion that I think everybody in this room shares in terms of our commitment and our belief in internationalization, both for higher education and for research. So I thank all of you. I also want to thank Priya for putting together this amazing group of people. I think that was the recipe for success. Priya, you've done a fantastic job. Thank you very, very much. I think you all gave to us this wonderful afternoon with 2 rounds of fantastically inspiring and interesting conversation. Thank you.
Having said this, it's my pleasure to say thank you to you, Bridget. We had a really deep discussion on science, diplomacy, and academy. Thanks for facilitating the discussion. We are really proud to have you as part of the Ruhr community. And be sure that Ruhr and all the people in the room, I'm very sure that I can talk to for everybody, we are committed to strengthen these transatlantic ties. Yeah, so it's not a challenge, it's a challenge, yes, but an opportunity that the world shrinks. So let's focus on the partners we trust and build on that and extend it. So having said this, once again, thank you very much, and everybody is now invited to continue the discussion, of course, during the reception on the upper floor. Have a nice evening, and we'll see you upstairs. Thank you.